My name is Allison Harper, and at 32 years old, I became the family failure. At least that is what they all believed. For 5 years, I built my tech company in secret, watching my valuation climb to hundreds of millions while my parents told everyone I was just figuring things out. Then came my brother James's engagement dinner. I sat quietly as they dismissed my life until his fiancée Stephanie looked at me and whispered those words that made time stop. Before I share what happened next, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Hit that like button and subscribe to join our community of survivors and thrivers. Growing up in Boston's affluent Beacon Hill neighborhood meant expectations were always sky high in the Harper family. My parents, Eleanor and William Harper, were pillars of Boston society. Mom, a renowned pediatric surgeon, and Dad, a senior partner at one of the city's oldest law firms. From my earliest memories, everything was a competition. And my older brother, James, was always winning. Why cannot you be more like your brother became the soundtrack of my childhood. James was 3 years older and seemingly perfect at everything. Straightest student captain of the debate team and later valedictorian. Meanwhile, I was the square peg, constantly being hammered into a round hole. It was not that I was unintelligent. I just thought differently. While James memorized textbooks and regurgitated facts to perfection, I was constantly questioning systems and imagining how things could work better. My third grade teacher called me innovatively disruptive. My father just called it being difficult. Allison, focus. My mother would scold during our mandatory family study hours. Your brother has already completed 2 practice SAT tests today. What have you accomplished? The truth was, while they forced me to study traditional subjects, I was secretly teaching myself to code. I built my first rudimentary website at 11 and had created a simple app by 14. None of this counted as achievement in the Harper household. High school was when the divide became unbridgeable. James was accepted to Phillips Epsit Academy, an elite boarding school, while I remained at our local private school. Every family dinner became a report on James' latest accomplishments, with occasional awkward questions about why I was only getting B's in calculus despite the expensive tutors. My one ally was my Aunt Meredith, my father's younger sister, and the family's other disappointment, who had chosen to become an artist rather than a lawyer or doctor. They will never understand people like us, Allison, she told me one afternoon while we sat in her paint-splattered studio. We see possibilities where they see only the established path. That is not a flaw. It is a gift. When James was accepted to Harvard, following in both our parents' footsteps, the celebration lasted for weeks. When I was accepted to MIT, the following year, a school I had specifically chosen for its innovation and engineering programs, the response was lukewarm. At least it is an Ivy League adjacent, my mother said with a sigh. Though, Harvard would have given you the connections you need. I lasted 3 semesters at MIT before dropping out, which was the ultimate unforgivable sin in the Harper family. The day I told them, my father actually walked out of the room. We have spent a fortune on your education, my mother said, her voice ice cold. What do you plan to do now? Work at a coffee shop. I have a job offer from a tech startup, I explained. The experience will be worth more than the degree. A startup, my father scoffed when he returned. Those glorified garage projects that disappear in 6 months. This is the future you are choosing over an MIT education. No matter how I tried to explain the opportunity, they could not see past the lack of prestige, the absence of a degree. From that point forward, I became the cautionary tale, the example of potential wasted. At family gatherings, relatives would ask about me in hushed tones, and my parents would respond with vague statements about me finding my way. James, meanwhile, completed Harvard with honors, then Harvard Business School, before landing a prestigious position at a global consulting firm. He became increasingly uncomfortable around me. As if my failure might somehow be contagious, the final straw came at my cousin's wedding when I was 24. I overheard my mother telling my Aunt Vivian that they were so worried about Allison, and at least we have James to make us proud. That night, I made the decision to leave Boston entirely. I had been saving money from my startup job and had built connections in the tech industry. Silicon Valley was calling and I needed to answer. "You are running away," my mother accused when I told them I was moving to San Francisco. "I am running towards something," I corrected her. "Something you cannot see." My father shook his head. "When this California fantasy fails, do not expect us to bail you out." As I packed up my apartment, Aunt Meredith was the only one who came to help. "You know what the difference is between you and the rest of the Harpers?" she asked, taping up a box of books. "What?" "You are brave enough to fail on your own terms rather than succeed on someone else's." I left Boston with 2 suitcases, a laptop, and $2,500. In my family's eyes, I had cemented my status as the disappointment, the failure, the cautionary tale. Little did they know that this failure was actually the first step toward building something beyond any of their imaginations. Landing in San Francisco with just $2,500 to my name should have terrified me. Instead, I felt an overwhelming sense of freedom. For the first time, I could define success on my own terms without the Harper family measuring stick constantly finding me too short. I rented a tiny studio apartment in Oakland, all I could afford, and took a job at a mid-sized health tech company as a junior developer. The pay was modest, but the learning opportunities were immense. My boss, Harold Wagner, quickly became the mentor I had always needed. "You have a unique way of looking at systems," Harold told me after I had redesigned an internal process that saved the company thousands of hours of manual work. "You do not just see what is, you see what could be." Unlike my family, Harold actually valued the way my mind worked. He gave me increasingly complex problems to solve and included me in meetings with stakeholders despite my junior position. It was during one of these meetings 8 months after I started that the idea hit me. We were discussing the challenges of medical data interoperability, the ability of different healthcare systems to exchange and interpret shared data. The existing solutions were clunky, expensive, and still required massive manual intervention. What if we approached this from the other direction? I asked, sketching out a rough diagram on my tablet. Instead of trying to make these legacy systems talk to each other, what if we created a universal translation layer that automatically interprets and standardizes the data regardless of source? The room fell silent. Then the CEO said, "That would revolutionize healthcare data management if it were possible." "It is possible," I insisted. "I know how to build it." That night I stayed up until 4:00 a.m. creating the prototype for what would eventually become Metalink, a healthcare data integration platform that would transform the industry. For the next 6 months, I worked my day job and spent every evening and weekend refining my prototype. When I finally showed Harold my work, his reaction confirmed what I already knew. "This is groundbreaking, Allison. You need to pursue this full-time." Quitting my job was terrifying, but I had saved enough to give myself 6 months of runway. I converted my tiny studio apartment into an even tinier living space plus office, subsisting on ramen and coffee while coding 18 hours a day. The breakthrough came when I presented my prototype at a small healthcare tech meetup. A venture capitalist in attendance approached me afterward. "This solves a $1 billion problem," she said bluntly. "I want to invest." 3 weeks later, I had $500,000 in seed funding and incorporated my company, Integrated Health Solutions. I decided to remain relatively anonymous, using only my initials, H, in company materials and hiring a more experienced executive to be the public face for investor meetings. This was partly strategic. Female founders statistically receive less funding, but also personal. I did not want my family to find out about my success until I was ready to share it on my terms. The first year was brutal. I hired 3 employees, and we worked out of a converted warehouse space in Oakland. There were nights I slept under my desk rather than going home. There were moments I nearly gave up. But gradually, hospital by hospital, we began to gain traction. By the end of year 2, we had 20 employees and had raised another $3 million in series of funding. Our product was being used by 15 hospital systems across the country, and we were starting to turn a profit. Year 3 brought explosive growth. Metalink was now being hailed as the solution the healthcare industry had been waiting for. We expanded to 50 employees, moved to proper offices in San Francisco, and I finally upgraded from my studio to a modest one-bedroom apartment. Through it all, I maintained minimal contact with my family. Holiday phone calls and obligatory birthday emails were the extent of our communication. They never asked detailed questions about my work, apparently, assuming I was still struggling at some insignificant tech job. I never volunteered information, allowing them to maintain their narrative that I was the family failure. By year 5, Integrated Health Solutions was valued at $300 million. We had contracts with over 200 hospital systems nationwide, had expanded to Canada and the UK, and employed over 100 people. Industry publications hailed Metalink as the innovation that finally solved healthcare interoperability. I was now financially secure beyond anything I had imagined. Yet, I still lived relatively modestly compared to my wealth. My focus was on the company, not on outward displays of success. The only luxury I allowed myself was an apartment with a view of the bay. Aunt Meredith was the only family member who knew the truth. I had flown her out to San Francisco in year 3 and given her a tour of my offices. "I always knew you would prove them wrong," she said, hugging me tightly. "But you know you will have to tell them eventually, right?" "When I am ready," I replied. "On my terms." As it turned out, fate had other plans for the big reveal. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday morning in late September. A thick cream envelope with the Harper family crest embossed on the back. Even before opening it, I knew it was something significant. My family never sent casual correspondence. Inside was a formal invitation to my brother James's engagement dinner, to be held at my parents' home in 3 weeks. There was also a handwritten note from James. "It would mean a lot if you could be there, Allison. It has been too long." I sat at my kitchen island staring at the invitation as my coffee grew cold. 5 years had passed since I had been in the same room as my entire family. Our interactions had been limited to brief phone calls and increasingly infrequent emails. The last time I had seen James in person was 2 years ago when he had a business trip to San Francisco. We had met for an awkward lunch where he spent most of the time talking about his career successes while asking vague questions about my work in tech. My immediate instinct was to decline. I had a company to run, important meetings, scheduled deadlines looming. But something, perhaps curiosity, perhaps a lingering desire for family connection, made me hesitate. That evening, I called Aunt Meredith. "The prodigal daughter returns," she said when I told her about the invitation. "Are you going to go?" "I do not know," I admitted. "Part of me thinks it would be walking back into the lion's den. They have their narrative about me. Why subject myself to that again? Maybe it is time to change the narrative," she suggested gently. "You are not the same person who left Boston 5 years ago." "I am not going back to announce my success like some sort of vindication tour," I said firmly. "That is not what I am suggesting," Meredith replied. "But hiding your achievements indefinitely is not healthy either. You have built something remarkable, Allison. That is simply the truth. You do not need to flaunt it, but you should not have to actively conceal it either." After our call, I sat on my balcony, watching the fog roll in over the Golden Gate Bridge. Perhaps it was time to at least open the door to reconciliation, even if I was not ready to fully walk through it. The next day, I RSVP'd yes to the invitation and booked my flight to Boston. The 3 weeks before the trip passed in a blur of meetings and product deadlines. I intentionally overloaded my schedule, leaving little time to dwell on the upcoming family reunion. The night before my flight, I stood before my closet, carefully selecting what to pack. This seemingly simple task became unexpectedly loaded with meaning. My wardrobe now contained designer pieces I could easily afford, but wearing them would immediately signal my financial success. After much deliberation, I chose understated quality basics. Nice enough to be appropriate for a formal family dinner, but nothing that screamed wealth or status. The flight from San Francisco to Boston gave me 5 hours to rehearse conversations in my head. How would I respond when asked about my work? How much was I willing to share? What would I say when they inevitably made dismissive comments about my career choices? As the plane began its descent into Logan Airport, I gazed down at the familiar coastline and felt a complex mixture of emotions, nostalgia, anxiety, and a strange sense of confidence that, had been entirely absent when I left this city 5 years ago. I took a taxi from the airport, watching the familiar landmarks pass by my window. Boston had changed in small ways. New buildings here and there, different businesses occupying familiar storefronts, but its essential character remained unchanged. Unlike San Francisco's constant reinvention, Boston prided itself on consistency and tradition. Rather than staying with my parents, as would have been expected, I had booked a room at the Liberty Hotel in Beacon Hill. This small act of independence was important to me. I needed neutral territory, a place to retreat if things became too overwhelming. After checking in and freshening up, I received a text from James. "Looking forward to seeing you tonight. Parents are excited too." I doubted the truth of that last statement, but replied with a simple, "Looking forward to it too. See you at 7, at 60:45. I found myself standing outside my parents' brownstone, the home where I had grown up. I paused on the sidewalk, taking in the familiar facade with its perfectly maintained window boxes and polished brass fixtures. 5 years ago I had left this house feeling like a failure. Now I returned as the founder of a 300 million company. Yet my hand still trembled slightly as I reached for the doorbell. The door swung open to reveal my father, William Harper, looking exactly as I remembered him. Tall, imposing, and impeccably dressed in a tailored suit. Despite this being a family dinner icon, he said, his tone formal as he leaned in for a brief stiff hug, "You made it." "Hi, Dad," I replied, stepping into the foyer that smelled of lemon polish and my mother's signature lies. "Thanks for having me." "Everyone is in the living room," he said, already turning away. "Your mother has been cooking all day." I followed him through the familiar hallway, past the wall of family photographs that chronicled our lives. I noticed my brother's side of the display had continued to grow. Graduation photos, professional head-shot vacation pictures, while mine had remained frozen in time. Ending with my high school graduation, the living room fell momentarily silent as I entered. My mother rose from her seat, her expression a carefully composed mask of politeness. "Allison, darling," she said, embracing me briefly. "How was your flight?" "It was fine, Mom," I replied. "You look well." "This is Stephanie," James said, stepping forward with a tall, elegant woman at his side. My fiancée Stephanie Morgan was not what I had expected. Based on my brother's past girlfriends and our family social circle, I had anticipated someone from a similar background. Old money, traditionally successful. Perhaps another lawyer or doctor. Instead, Stephanie had a warm smile that reached her eyes and a firm handshake. "I have heard so much about you," she said. And surprisingly, she sounded genuine. "All bad, I assume," I joked immediately, regretting the self-deprecating comment when I saw my mother's slight frown. "Not at all," Stephanie replied smoothly. "James mentioned you work in tech in San Francisco. That must be exciting." Before I could respond, my mother interrupted. "Let me introduce you to everyone else. You remember your Uncle Philip and Aunt Vivian, of course, and Cousin Margaret and her husband Thomas." The next 15 minutes were a blur of greetings with extended family members. Some genuinely pleased to see me, others, clearly curious about the failure returned from exile. Aunt Meredith arrived last, giving me a knowing wink, as she embraced me warmly. "You look wonderful," she whispered. "Success suits you." The dinner setting was classic Eleanor Harper, formal china crystal, glasses, silver candelabras, and elaborate flower arrangements. As a child, I had always found these formal dinners suffocating. Now they seemed like theater, an elaborate performance of wealth and tradition. As we took our seats, I found myself between Aunt Meredith and my father's cousin Walter, a boring investment banker, who had always treated me with condescending politeness. Stephanie and James sat directly across from me, with my parents at either end of the long table. So Alice and Uncle Philip called down the table as the first course was served. "James tells us you are still in California making a go of it in tech. Are you?" The way he said tech made it sound like I was selling beaded bracelets on a beach somewhere. "Yes," I replied simply. "I work in healthcare technology. Entry-level positions can be a good foot in the door," my mother interjected, before I could elaborate. "Perhaps you will work your way up to management eventually." I took a sip of water, choosing not to correct her assumption. "And where are you living now?" Aunt Vivian asked. "Still in that studio apartment. I have a one-bedroom now," I replied, omitting that it was in one of San Francisco's most exclusive buildings with panoramic views of the bay. "Well, real estate in California is so expensive," she said with a sympathetic cluck. "We all have to start somewhere." Throughout the first course, I kept my responses minimal, allowing my family to maintain their narrative about my life. I could feel Aunt Meredith's frustration beside me, but she respected my choice to remain vague. As the main course was served, my father stood to offer a toast. He spoke at length about James, his academic achievements, his professional success, his perfect choice of bride. Then, almost as an afterthought, "And we are pleased that Allison could join us from California." I raised my glass along with everyone else, meeting James' eyes across the table. For a moment, I thought I detected discomfort there, perhaps even guilt, but it was quickly replaced by his usual, confident smile. The conversation shifted to Stephanie and her family background, her career, how she and James had met. I listened with genuine interest, finding myself liking my future sister-in-law more than I had anticipated. "Stephanie works for a healthcare data company," James explained proudly. "She is part of their hospital implementation team." "That sounds interesting," I said. "What kind of work do you do specifically?" "I help hospitals integrate our platform with their existing systems," Stephanie explained. "It is challenging but rewarding. Our technology is really transforming how patient data is shared between providers." Something about her description sounded familiar, but I did not immediately make the connection. "Technology is changing everything," my father said dismissively. "Though I still prefer to have a real doctor rather than a computer making decisions about my health." "It is not about replacing doctors, Dad." I found myself saying it is about giving them better tools and more accurate information. He raised an eyebrow, surprised by my sudden engagement in the conversation. "Exactly," Stephanie agreed enthusiastically. "The platform I work with has actually reduced medication errors by 40% in some hospitals because it ensures all providers have access to the same accurate patient information." Now, I was truly paying attention. Those statistics sounded very specific and very familiar. "What is the name of your company?" I asked, a suspicion forming. "Integrated Health Solutions," she replied. "We are best known for our flagship product Metalink. It is revolutionary, really. I was so excited when they hired me 6 months ago." The table continued its conversation, but a roaring had started in my ears. Stephanie worked for my company that I had built from nothing, my 300 million failure. Stephanie was still talking, explaining to my confused relatives what healthcare interoperability meant and why it mattered. "The founder is this brilliant woman who created an entirely new approach to the problem. She is quite private, though. Most people just know her as a but she developed is changing healthcare delivery across the country." She paused, a slight frown crossing her face as she looked more closely at me. I could see the gears turning as she connected my name, my initials, and my mention of working in healthcare technology. Then her eyes widened and she whispered just loud enough for those nearby to hear. "Wait, you are the founder." The room fell silent, all eyes turning toward me. My mother's fork clattered against her plate. My father froze with his wine glass halfway to his lips. And just like that, my carefully maintained worlds collided. Time seemed to stop as Stephanie's question hung in the air. The elegant dining room with its crystal chandelier, an ancestral portrait, suddenly felt airless, as if all the oxygen had been sucked out in that single moment of recognition. "You are Stephanie," repeated her voice, stronger now. "Allison Harper, you founded Integrated Health Solutions." I met her gaze steadily across the table, aware of every pair of eyes fixed on me. In that crystalline moment of truth, I felt an odd sense of calm. "Yes," I said simply, "I am." The silence that followed was profound. My mother sat perfectly still, her face a mask of confusion. My father's expression cycled rapidly through disbelief, shock, and something that looked suspiciously like recalculation. James stared at me as if seeing a stranger. "But that is a 300 million company," Uncle Philip sputtered, breaking the silence. "The Metalink platform is used in nearly every major hospital system in the country. 212 hospital systems in the United States plus 28 in Canada and 16 in the UK as of last quarter. I corrected mildly, and our most recent valuation was actually 340 million. Aunt Vivian let out a small gasp. Cousin Margaret was rapidly typing on her phone, presumably looking up my company. My father had set down his wine glass and was now leaning forward, his attorney's mind visibly reassessing everything he thought he knew about his daughter. I do not understand, my mother finally said, her voice faint. You never said anything about founding a company. You told us you worked in tech. I do work in tech, I replied. I just did not specify that I own the company. Stephanie was looking at me with a mixture of awe and embarrassment. I am so sorry, she said. I did not mean to put you on the spot like this. It is just everyone at the company talks about the founder like she is this mysterious genius. I never imagined. It is fine. I assured her I have kept a low profile intentionally. Allison is the CEO of Integrated Health Solutions. James asked Stephanie directly, as if I could not answer for myself. She is not just the CEO. Stephanie explained clearly, still processing the revelation herself. She is the founder. She created the entire MetaLink platform. Our CTO says her original code architecture was revolutionary. She turned back to me. The company holds 8 patents based on your original work. 9 now, I corrected gently. The 9th was approved last month. Cousin Margaret held up her phone. It says here that Integrated Health Solutions was named one of the top 10 most innovative healthcare companies by Forbes last year. Number 6, I nodded. We are hoping to crack the top 5 this year. My father cleared his throat. Allison, perhaps you could tell us more about your company. It seems we have been uninformed about your professional achievements. There was a new tone in his voice, the same one he used when addressing successful clients or influential colleagues. It made something twist uncomfortably in my stomach. Actually, Aunt Meredith interjected a fierce gleam in her eye. I think what William means to say is that they completely underestimated you and are now realizing what a tremendous mistake that was. She raised her wine glass in my direction to Allison, who succeeded beyond anyone's expectations, except perhaps her own. The toast hung awkwardly in the air with only Stephanie Meredith and a few others raising their glasses. My mother remained frozen, her perfectly manicured hands gripping the edge of the table as if to steady herself. When you left Boston, my mother said carefully, you never mentioned starting a company. I did not start it immediately, I explained. I worked for another healthcare tech company first, learning the industry. The idea for MetaLink came about 8 months after I moved to San Francisco. And you never thought to tell your family about this success? My father asked, an edge to his voice. I met his gaze directly. When have you ever asked about my work in any detail? The conversations we have had over the past 5 years have been surface level at best. You asked if I was still in tech, as if I was working at a Best Buy. James shifted uncomfortably in his seat. I saw you 2 years ago in San Francisco. You never mentioned founding a company then either. You spent that entire lunch telling me about your promotion and your new condo. I reminded him when you asked about my work. You changed the subject before I could get into any detail. An uncomfortable silence fell over the table again. The family narrative about me, the dropout, the disappointment. The cautionary tale was crumbling before their eyes, and no one quite knew how to proceed. Stephanie, bless her, attempted to cut through the tension. This is actually amazing, she said brightly. I cannot believe I am marrying into the family of the woman who created the platform I work with every day. The hospitals I visit consider MetaLink to be revolutionary. 340 million, Uncle Philip muttered, still stuck on the valuation. Did you raise venture capital? My father asked. Slipping into business mode. Initially I nodded. 500,000 in seed funding, then 3 million Series A and 25 million Series B. We have been profitable since year 3. So we have not needed to raise additional rounds. And your ownership stake, he pressed. Dad, James interrupted, looking embarrassed. I retain 51% controlling interest. The venture firms hold 30%, and the remaining 19% is split among early employees and our ESOP. My father nodded, clearly impressed, despite himself. My mother had still barely moved her social mask completely, fallen away as she struggled to reconcile her perception of me with this new reality. So all this time she finally set her voice tight. While we have been worrying about you thinking you were struggling in a tiny apartment with a dead-end job, you have been what a millionaire tech founder on paper at least I acknowledged. Though that was never the point. Then what was the point? James asked, something hard in his voice. To make us all look foolish. To prove us wrong. The point was to solve a problem that needed solving, I replied, firmly. To build something meaningful. The fact that it became financially successful was secondary. My father scoffed. 300 million is hardly secondary. For the Harpers? Perhaps not, I said quietly. But for me, it was always about the work itself. My mother abruptly stood, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor. I need to check on dessert, she announced. Though the catering staff had been handling everything all evening, she disappeared into the kitchen, her shoulders rigid. I should help her, Aunt Vivian murmured, following quickly. The remaining family members sat in awkward silence, the elaborate dinner now thoroughly derailed. Stephanie looked between James and me, clearly sensing the tension, but not fully understanding its roots. I have to say, she ventured, working for your company has been the best professional experience of my career. The culture is amazing and everyone is so committed to the mission of improving patient care. Thank you, I said sincerely. That means a lot. We work hard to maintain that culture as we grow. How many employees do you have now? James asked, making a visible effort to engage. 123, I replied. We are opening a Boston office next quarter actually. Boston, Aunt Meredith perked up. Will you be spending more time here then? Summy nodded. I will need to be here for the launch and initial hiring. My father was watching me with a calculating expression. The healthcare technology sector is booming. Have you considered acquisition offers? We have received several, I acknowledged. But I am not interested in selling. We still have too much work to do. My mother returned, composed once more, but with a certain brittleness to her smile. Dessert will be served momentarily, she announced. Allison, perhaps after dinner you could tell us more about this company of yours. It seems we have quite a lot of catching up to do. Her tone made it clear this was less an invitation for sharing and more an accusation of withholding. The carefully reconstructed mask of polite society could not quite hide the hurt and confusion underneath. As the dessert plates were set before us, I realized that this revelation, while satisfying in some ways, had opened a Pandora's box of complicated emotions and damaged relationships that would not be easily resolved over creme brulee and coffee. Dessert was a tense affair. Conversation occurred in stilted bursts with extended family members, asking increasingly specific questions about my company. While my immediate family processed their shock in different ways, my father had shifted into networking mode, suddenly interested in every aspect of my business. My mother maintained a brittle smile, saying, "Little James," alternated between pride and something that looked uncomfortably like resentment. After dessert, as guests began to move to the living room for coffee, James touched my elbow. "Can we talk?" he asked quietly. In the study, I followed him to our father's wood-paneled sanctuary with its leather bound books and hunting prints, a room designed to impress rather than comfort. James closed the door behind us and turned to face me. "Why did not you tell me?" he asked without preamble. 2 years ago in San Francisco. Why keep it secret? I considered my answer carefully. Would it have changed anything between us if you had known? Of course it would. Have, he exclaimed. I would have been proud of you. I would have told everyone about my brilliant sister, the tech founder. The way you used to tell everyone about your brilliant sister, the college dropout, I countered. James? Our entire relationship has been defined by comparison. You winning, me losing. I needed to build something that was just mine. Not measured against your achievements or our parents' expectations. He ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair, momentarily disheveling it. I never saw it as a competition. You did not have to, I replied. You were always winning without even trying. That is not fair, he protested. I worked hard. For everything I achieved. I know you did, I acknowledged. And you deserved your success. But can you honestly say you have ever had to fight to be taken seriously by our parents, that you have ever been the disappointment. He was silent, unable to deny the truth we both knew. When I left Boston, I continued. I needed to find out who I was outside of the Harper family narrative. I needed to succeed or fail on my own terms. And you succeeded, he said quietly. Spectacularly. Yes? I nodded. But not to prove anything to anyone else. That is what I need you to understand. Before he could respond, there was a knock at the door and our father entered. Without waiting for an answer. There you are, he said. All business now, Allison. I have been thinking. Your Boston expansion presents some interesting opportunities. I know several hospital board members who would be valuable connections for you. We should set up meetings while you are in town. The swift transformation from dismissive parent to networking ally was jarring. Dad, I already have meetings scheduled with Massachusetts General and Beth Israel. Our business development team has been planning this expansion for months. Of course, he nodded undeterred. But personal connections can open doors that formal channels cannot. The Rogers' son, Jeffrey, is chief of surgery at Brigham and Women's. I could arrange a dinner. I appreciate the offer, I said carefully. But we already have a relationship with Brigham and Women's time. They have been using our platform for over a year. My father looked momentarily thrown but recovered quickly. Well, there are other introductions I could make. The health care sector in Boston is tightly knit. William James interjected. Maybe now is not the time for business networking. My father frowned, looking between us. I am simply trying to help. Allison has built something impressive, and I have connections that could be valuable. The way those connections would have been valuable 5 years ago when I was starting out. I asked quietly, when I told you about my ideas and you dismissed them as a California fantasy. A flash of discomfort crossed his face. That was different. You were just starting out with no track record. Now you have proven yourself. And that is the only time I deserve your support. After I have already succeeded without it. The study door opened again and my mother appeared. Her perfect hostess composure had slipped, revealing the emotional turmoil underneath. Allison, she said, her voice tight. I think we need to talk. James and my father exchanged glances. Then my father nodded. We will give you some privacy, he said, ushering James out. When the door closed, my mother remained standing, arms crossed defensively across her chest. Why did not you tell us? She asked, echoing James's question, but with a sharper edge. All these years letting us believe you were struggling, barely getting by. Do you have any idea how worried we were about you? Were you worried, Mom? I asked, gently. Or embarrassed? Color flooded her cheeks. That is an awful thing to say. Of course we were worried. You dropped out of college, moved across the country, barely communicated. And did you ever really ask time about what I was doing? Did you ever show interest in my work beyond assuming it was insignificant? How could we know if you never told us? She countered. I stopped telling you things when it became clear you were not listening, I said. When I left Boston, Dad told me not to come back for help. When my California fantasy failed, you both had already decided my story before I had a chance to write it. She sank into one of the leather chairs, suddenly looking tired. We wanted what was best for you. No, I corrected her. You wanted what you thought was best for me. There is a difference. We gave you every advantage, she said, a tremor in her voice. The best schools, tutors, opportunities. You gave me the advantages that would have helped you succeed, I replied. But I am not you or Dad or James. I needed different things. And now you have succeeded without us. She said, a hint of bitterness in her tone. Is that what tonight was about? Showing us all how wrong we were. Tonight was about coming to my brother's engagement dinner, I said firmly. I had no intention of revealing anything about my company. That happened by pure coincidence. She was quiet for a moment, studying me with new eyes. You really have built something significant, have not you? Yes, I said simply. I have. And you did not think that was something to share with your family? I sighed. Mom? Family, sharing goes both ways. When was the last time either of us really shared anything meaningful with each other? We have been going through the motions of family for years, but the emotional connection has been missing. She flinched slightly at this truth. I always thought you pulled away because you were unhappy with your choices, that you were avoiding us because you were ashamed. I pulled away because every interaction left me feeling judged and diminished. I explained it was easier to keep my distance than to constantly defend my path. And now your path has led to extraordinary success, she observed, while we have been pitying you. I never wanted your pity, I said. Just your acceptance. The door opened again and Aunt Meredith poked her head in. Sorry to interrupt, but some of the guests are leaving. They want to say goodbye to both of you. My mother stood automatically straightening, her clothes and hair, the social mask sliding back into place. We will continue this conversation later, she said, already moving toward the door. I followed her back to the living room, where the extended family was gathering coats and saying goodbyes. There was a new difference in how they addressed me now. Subtle changes in body language and tone that acknowledged my unexpected status. Uncle Philip pumped my hand enthusiastically. We will have to have lunch before you leave town, he said, pressing his business card into my palm. I have some investment ideas I would love to discuss. Aunt Vivian hugged me with newfound warmth. We always knew you were special, dear, she said, rewriting history on the spot. As the last guests departed, only the immediate family and Stephanie remained. The atmosphere was heavy with unresolved tension and unasked questions. I should be going too, I said, reaching for my coat. It is getting late. You are staying at a hotel, my mother asked, sounding genuinely surprised. Yes, the Liberty, you could have stayed here, she said, a hint of hurt in her voice. I think we all needed some space tonight, I replied diplomatically. Stephanie approached me as I prepared to leave. I am still mortified that I put you on the spot like that, she said. But I have to say it is an honor to meet you properly. What you have built has changed how we deliver healthcare. Her sincerity was touching. Thank you. And please do not be embarrassed. It was bound to come out eventually. Would you have time for coffee tomorrow? She asked hesitantly. I would love to hear more about how you developed the initial concept for Metalink. I would like that, I agreed. Surprising myself with how much I meant it, James appeared at her side, his expression still complex. I will walk you out, he offered. At the door he paused. This is a lot to process, he admitted, but I am proud of you, Allison, truly. Thank you, I said. Searching his face for signs of the brother I had once been close to before competition and comparison had driven us apart. That means more than you know. As I stepped out into the cool Boston evening, I felt both emotionally drained and strangely liberated. The carefully constructed walls between my past and present had crumbled, for better or worse. What would be built in their place remained to be seen. Back in my hotel room, I kicked off my heels and collapsed onto the king-sized bed, emotionally exhausted. The ceiling fan spun lazily above me as I replayed the evening's events. A tangle of conflicting emotions swirling through my mind. Vindication, yes, but also sadness, for the years of disconnect and uncertainty about what came next. My phone buzzed with a text from Aunt Meredith. You were magnificent tonight. Breakfast tomorrow, my treat. I smiled and texted back my agreement. If anyone could help me process what had happened, it was Meredith. Sleep came fitfully. My dreams, a chaotic mix of past and present, childhood dinners, where I was. Suddenly the CEO board meetings interrupted by my mother's criticisms. I woke early watching the sunrise paint the Boston skyline in shades of pink and gold. Meredith was already waiting when I arrived at the small cafe near the public garden, dressed in her signature artistic layers, despite the early hour. There she is, she grinned, rising to embrace me. The talk of Beacon Hill this morning, I imagine. That bad? I asked, sliding into the booth across from her. Vivian called me at 7 a.m. to pump me for information, Meredith confirmed. Apparently she is telling everyone she always knew you had something special. I could not help but laugh. 5 years of pitying comments, and now suddenly, I was always destined for greatness. That is Boston society, for you, Meredith shrugged. But enough about them. How are you feeling? Considered the question carefully, relieved in some ways. It was exhausting, maintaining separate lives but also uncertain. I do not know where things go from here with my family. That is up to you, Meredith said, stirring her coffee thoughtfully. You are in a position of power now. Not just financially, but emotionally. You get to decide how much of yourself to share with them going forward. I never wanted power over them. I sighed. I just wanted acceptance. Sometimes we need the former to get the latter, she observed. Sad but true. After breakfast with Meredith, I met Stephanie for coffee near her office. Away from the family dynamics, she was even more impressive, sharp, thoughtful, and genuinely passionate about healthcare improvement. The implementation team has been pushing for certain features, she explained animatedly, describing challenges with the current system. I had no idea I would be giving feedback directly to the founder. That is exactly the kind of information I need, I told her. The distance between development and implementation is something we are always trying to close. By the time we parted, I had gained not only valuable product insights, but potentially a friend. Against all expectations, my brother had chosen someone I genuinely respected and liked. The most difficult conversation came that afternoon when my parents requested I join them for lunch at their club. The setting was deliberate, neutral territory where social conventions would prevent any scenes yet firmly on their turf. We have been doing a lot of thinking, my father began once we were seated, and the waiter had departed. And we owe you an apology. The words were so unexpected that I nearly dropped my water glass. We failed to see your potential, he continued. We measured your success by traditional standards and missed the innovation and vision you possessed. My mother nodded in agreement, though I could see this was more difficult for her. We were worried about you, she added. But we should have trusted you more. Their apology, while genuine, still framed my success as the justification for their acceptance, something I had earned through achievement rather than deserved inherently. Yet, it was a start. I appreciate that, I said carefully, but I need you to understand something. My worth as your daughter is not tied to my net worth or professional achievements. If Metalink had failed, if I was working an ordinary job in San Francisco, I would still deserve your respect and support. My father looked momentarily taken aback, but my mother surprised me by reaching across the table to take my hand. You are right, she said quietly. And that is a harder lesson for us to learn. I think we have always defined ourselves by achievement. We raised you and James the same way. It has not been entirely healthy for either of us, I pointed out. No, she acknowledged. Perhaps not. Can we start over? My father asked. Not pretend the past did not happen but move forward differently. I considered his request. We can try, I said finally. But it will take time. Trust works both ways and we have all been hurt. Over the next few days before returning to San Francisco, I had several more conversations with my family, including a surprisingly vulnerable one with James. Sitting in a park near his apartment, he admitted to his own struggles with our parents' expectations. You escaped, he said, tossing breadcrumbs to eager squirrels. I stayed and kept trying to be perfect. Sometimes I wonder which of us made the better choice. It is not about better or worse, I told him. We each found our own path, and for what it is worth, you are very good at what you do. So are you, he smiled, the competitive edge finally absent from his voice. When I returned to San Francisco, I carried with me a cautious optimism about my family relationships. The wounds of the past would not heal overnight, but we had at least acknowledged them, a necessary first step. The experience changed me in unexpected ways. At work, I became more visible, stepping into my role as the public face of the company I had built. I recognized that my reluctance to claim credit had been partially rooted in old insecurities that no longer served me. I also began implementing changes to my work-life balance. The company had become my whole identity, partly because I had disconnected from other parts of myself. Daughter, sister, friend. Now I began to rebuild those connections, not just with family, but with colleagues and with the broader community. 3 months after the engagement dinner revelation, I returned to Boston for the official opening of our East Coast office. This time, my parents and James attended the ribbon-cutting ceremony, visibly proud as I spoke about our company's mission and growth. You are a natural leader, my mother commented afterward with genuine admiration rather than surprise. That evening, as we celebrated over dinner, I realized that while I had not received the validation I had craved from my family during those difficult early years, that absence had ultimately made me stronger. I had learned to trust my own judgment, to find validation in the work itself rather than external approval. What is next for Integrated Health Solutions? My father asked, now genuinely interested in my vision. We are looking at international expansion, I explained. Healthcare systems in Europe and Asia face similar challenges with data integration. And what is next for you personally? My mother asked a question she had never really posed before. I smiled, appreciating the shift in perspective it represented. Finding balance. I said honestly, building something meaningful professionally does not preclude building a meaningful personal life too. That is something I am just learning. As I flew back to San Francisco the next day, I reflected on the strange journey that had brought me to this point. 5 years ago, I had left Boston feeling like a failure, carrying the weight of my family's disappointment. Now I returned, as a success by anyone's standards. Yet with the wisdom to know that external metrics were never the true measure of worth. In my apartment that evening, I stood on my balcony watching the fog roll in beneath the Golden Gate Bridge. My phone buzzed with a text from Stephanie, sharing a photo of her successfully implementing our system at a new hospital. A second text followed from my mother asking about dates for my next visit. The journey of healing with my family had only just begun. But for the first time, I felt we were all walking in the same direction. I had spent years building a company that connected disparate systems, allowing them to communicate effectively. Perhaps now I could apply those same principles to reconnecting the disparate parts of my own life. Success, I had learned, was not measured by valuation or validation. True success came from creating something authentic, something that aligned with your values and made a difference. Whether that was a company, a relationship, or simply a life lived on your own terms, have you ever had to prove yourself to people who doubted you or found success in an unexpected way? I would love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this journey resonated with you, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more stories about overcoming obstacles and finding your own path. And remember, sometimes the people who do not believe in you are the ones who inspire you to prove them wrong. Thank you for listening, and I wish you courage on your own journey of self-discovery.